Hey everyone, I got 11 o'clock. My name is Kyle Smith. I'm a director with Titus, and glad that we can join here virtually, as I know we were supposed to be on site in last month, but we're happy here. And Mike Kinsey is a practice director with Titus, and he's going to be talking about hire for performance. So I'll let Mike take it away, and people can hop on, and we will record this so you guys can see it here in the future.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyle. Yeah, curious if Linda would like to jump in and say anything to kick us off. Certainly would welcome that. And we also know that people can certainly turn on their cameras if they would like, if they're show worthy right now, to be able to jump on. We want it to be as interactive as possible. I know we only have an hour together today, but Linda, is there anything that you wanted to say to jump in? I don't mean to put you on the spot.
First of all, I'd like to welcome everybody to our first virtual SCHRMA meeting. Kind of excited about it. I'm sorry I don't have a picture, but I don't have video access in my office. So otherwise I would be joining you today. Jamie is actually one of our co-presidents, and I noticed she was on the line. I don't know if she has anything else she wants to say, but we thank you very much for providing us this opportunity to give some value to our membership. So Mike, other than that, it's all yours. Thanks.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, Linda. Yeah, really appreciate it. We're excited for the opportunity to be able to speak. And honestly, if anybody does want to jump in and contribute, I know that we are going to be recording this session, but if there's questions that people have, you certainly can jump in, unmute, and throw your questions out. It's not rude if you interrupt me. I have a tendency to just continue to talk. So please jump in and do that. Or you can even, within the chat function, I see some people have figured out the Zoom group chat. You can find that usually at the bottom center of the screen, and you can type questions in, whether privately or publicly, and we can make sure that we do that. Okay, so let's jump in and get started. So just really quickly about me, the least important piece of this whole training. My name is Mike Kinsey. I'm Senior Director here at Titus. I've been doing this for quite a long time. This is something that I'm extraordinarily passionate about. Want to make sure that we really give you some idea of how we measure quality of hire. That's a really critical piece of what we do. Now, I did get a note saying that we're coming through a little bit broken. Can everybody hear my audio okay? Hannah or Kyle, maybe a thumbs up if you can hear me coming through. Perfect. Okay. Apologies if we're coming through. I know the remote is going to come with its own challenges here, but again, this will be recorded if there's anything that cuts in and out. Good. So really what we want to focus on is the fact that the majority of partners that we work with, so we work with hundreds of different partners when it comes to the area of talent acquisition, but really when it comes to quality of hire. And most of our partners really do agree that they want to invest in quality, but what they've been investing in lately is quantity, going through kind of the age-old post and pray methodology is what we say, of posting the jobs to a talent job board and just hoping that it comes through. And that's a lot of work on the back end to be able to go through that amount of resumes. And usually your screening process might look a little bit something like this. Not super robust, probably not going to give you a great understanding of that individual. We're flinging resumes and we're kind of hoping that something good comes through from that. And so if we know if we plant bad seeds, there's bad fruit that comes from it. And so really where companies tend to get lost is in the area, first and foremost, of misalignment. And misalignment is just not having things defined internally. Working with so many hiring managers over the years and executive teams, it's really fascinating how much they're not in agreement all the time on what they're looking for in that opportunity or that next person. And so really what it can do is it can make it difficult for the incumbent coming in and having different expectations put on them. It can also be really difficult for the hiring team when it comes to just not having that calibration internally. Most every hiring manager kind of has their own, we put in quotes, special process. Some hiring managers say, hey, I'll know in 5 minutes if this person's going to be a good fit, which just isn't usually the case. Five minutes isn't going to get you there. It's going to know if they have a good first impression, but how do you really know that this person is going to last long term? So that misalignment is where so many companies do get lost. The other piece is just an incomplete attraction strategy. How do you know that you're really going after and measuring the top performers of your industry versus people that have really good looking resumes and have good interviewing skills? And then the last piece is engagement and retention issues. Knowing that so much turnover is due to bad hiring decisions, there's just not a whole lot of strategy around fixing those issues. Just in terms of employment branding, how your company looks to the outside, that's going to be very critical in this. And so a couple other things that are pitfalls that people fall into is the average resume is 6 seconds in terms of how long somebody reviews it. So we spend a lot of time working on our resume and making it look nice, but knowing hiring managers' eyes usually go to a couple of different things. The name, we make a judgment. We look at their career history, we look at their education, and that's pretty much where we get to. So we're not taking a lot of time to prepare ourselves. So as a hiring manager, when we say lack of preparation, the average hiring manager is probably starting to prepare for their interview when they get their Outlook calendar reminder for 15 minutes saying that your interview is about to happen. It's not a lot of preparation. And I know that everybody's time is valuable and stretched, but that lack of preparation is really, really difficult in making sure that we're analyzing the best possible candidates. The last piece is just an overall lack of accuracy. So unstructured interviews, like the ones we talked about, statistically speaking, that only accurately predicts actual on-the-job performance by 6%. So at that point, you may as well pretty much pick a name out of a hat. And so that's pretty much leading to a lot of the downfall when it comes to overall quality of hire. When we sent out surveys to hundreds of different organizations, the thing that came through very definitively, especially on HR teams, is what is the most important thing to your organization? Overwhelmingly, people agreed that quality is what they were looking for in their candidates. But when it came to how does their management team actually measure you and how are you getting basically your credit, it's speed and cost. So when we invest so little in finding quality of hire, it's no surprise that we continue to have high turnover rates and we continue to churn through people. That can be a really difficult thing because we know there's kind of competing agendas and it's nobody's fault. We know that there's a bottom line and that there's a budget, but I think we can all agree that best quality of hire is the thing that we're looking for and trying to do it in a timely and cost-effective way. So we also asked, how do people measure quality of their incumbents, of the people that they hire? Overwhelmingly, retention was the #1 measure. It's kind of an internal joke for us at Titus when we're just like, retention, that's a really tough one because we all know Bob in the back room who's been working at the company for 20 years and nobody knows what Bob does. Or the marriages that have lasted 25 years and they don't last because duration doesn't necessarily equate to quality. I know those are sensitive topics, but it's the reality of what it is from a hiring standpoint as well. As duration doesn't always equate to, is somebody hitting their goals and objectives that they're looking for. Similarly, when we look at performance reviews, the vast majority of people are doing some sort of performance review, but those, the majority of the time, are somewhat subjective measures. It sometimes comes down to, does the manager get along with them and do they like them versus are they hitting and achieving what they need to achieve? Same with management satisfaction. That's less than half of companies do a management satisfaction, but it is still a bit of a subjective measure versus performance objectives. We're going to talk in a little bit more detail about those during our hour together here today, but performance objectives are actual measurable goals that we're saying you must hit these at a minimum to best measure and analyze quality of hire. All right. Just a reminder, you can unmute if you've got questions. You can throw it in the chat, and we were happy to go through questions. If there's anything even that you disagree with, please, we would love for this to be an open session as much as possible. Otherwise, we're going to keep rolling through. A methodology that we believe in when it comes to measuring the entire person or the entire candidate is a methodology called head, heart, and briefcase. Maybe some of you have heard of it before. This is something we really strongly believe in when it comes to measuring the whole person, because historically what we look at is the briefcase down at the bottom. These are, what does your resume look like? What does your LinkedIn profile tend to look like? That is a pretty easy thing to adjust, and your briefcase should continually be getting more and more filled. And it should always be, I would say, pretty easy to prep an interview based around the briefcase. What's a bit more difficult, and I think it takes some vulnerability to be able to do this, especially from a legal standpoint. I think people really get hesitant when it comes to asking heart-based questions around values and interests and beliefs. We certainly can help in that area. If people are curious of some of the heart-based questions that we ask, by all means, please email us. We're happy to share those. We want to make sure that this is part of your equation when it comes to hiring and analyzing talent within your industry. Heart-based is, do your values as a candidate align with our company's defined values? Are those interests and beliefs something that are going to culturally make sense? What is your actual personality? That all comes from the heart, pride, ego. You know, those are things that you can gain a bit from the interview. And those things also do change over time, similar to the briefcase. What's a lot more consistent and stable is the head component. And that's behavioral traits and cognitive reasoning. So we look at this as kind of, what are your intrinsic behavioral attributes? Things like competitiveness, attention to detail. Are you more introspective or extroverted? Those are things that don't really change too much over time. If you think of yourself at one point in your life as a big time introvert, you're a bit more reserved, you take more time to connect with people, it usually doesn't suddenly change a year later. These are things that are very, very innate within us. Same with cognitive reasoning. It's kind of, what is your capacity? What is your learning ability? Can you ramp up at a similar speed, or at least at the speed that we're looking for this potential role? So these are the head, heart, briefcase. If you measure each one 33% of the equation, we say you're gonna have a much more, you're gonna have a higher likelihood that this is gonna be a good hit when it comes to a candidate. So our 4-step process that we want to introduce, called Hire for Performance, is a 4-step process including the launch, the hunt, the evaluation, and the close. So we're going to start, and we're going to focus a lot on a couple of these, namely the launch and the evaluation. We're not going to touch too much on the hunt. That's a little bit more of how to actually recruit, creative messaging, things that are a little bit more workshop-esque, and we can certainly connect with you individually, give you some pointers, some messaging that's worked, that has been really good hit rate when it comes to LinkedIn messages or email messages. Happy to help however we can in that area. But the big one is making sure that you as your organizations know how to really prepare and align. That is really critical for us as we go through the exercise today. So gaining this necessary information from the hiring teams, number one, we want to make sure that we have those performance objectives. We say at minimum have 2 things that are measurable for each role, up to 5 performance objectives. And we'll dig into those a little bit here on the next slide, but performance objectives are so critical, as we mentioned before, because they have the ultimate ability to help us measure the quality of hire of that individual. These have to be defined. Otherwise, we don't really know, did we get quality? It becomes more and more subjective the less that we focus on, are they accomplishing and doing what we've expected them to do at a minimum? The other thing we want to gain from our hiring team is an employee value proposition. Employee value proposition is essentially, how are we going to pitch this opportunity to anybody outside of our organization? What makes the role itself or the company itself or both unique and attractive to people? We want to make sure we get calibrated And we want to make sure that we establish our defined process. And we're going to talk about each one of these, so we don't need to go through them in too much detail here. But number one, performance objectives. Make sure you're thinking doing versus having. So I know historic job descriptions are a little bit, they're a bit underwhelming. When we look at them, they say things like must have 5 years of experience in a similar industry. It must be able to lift 25 pounds, etc. They're a little bit more of having versus doing, because we ask so many hiring managers, hey, if this person had 4 years of experience, but they were just a rock star and they were doing all these different elements and they hit all these performance objectives, you wouldn't consider them because you have 5 years? Like, well, no, we would consider it. Okay, well then why do you have that on your job description? It's changing the mindset of doing versus having and making sure that we have these established performance objectives in place. How great from a candidate perspective to be able to look at a job description, or what we call a performance profile, and look and know exactly what they need to accomplish in their first year at your organization. It's extraordinarily refreshing to be able to provide that information. And it's also great internally for your teams and your managers to be able to look at this information and say, wow, I think we've got it. I think we know exactly how we're going to measure performance. And now we kind of know our top ranks within the company. So it's been a great exercise for us and the majority of our partners. So a couple of examples. SMART format. SMART format is really critical when we're writing these out. Make sure that the task is specific. We don't want broad generalizations. We want a specific task that this person needs to accomplish. Make sure it's objective. Most importantly, make sure it is something measurable. It can't be something along the lines of make sure that clients like you. That is a very hard thing to measure unless you've got a client satisfaction measure. And if you do, put that measurable. What is the minimum client satisfaction mark that you would want this person to achieve? Is this an achievable action? We get a lot of people that say, well, we want somebody to hit $2 million in sales year one. We're like, cool, who has done that? Well, nobody, but that's what we want this person to do. Well, if nobody's done it, how do we know that it's an achievable action? Let's make sure that we are setting proper expectations. These are minimum expectations that we want this person to achieve. Is it relevant? Is this something important? Why is this important to the organization? Is this something you've done over the last 50 years? Or is this something that's a major initiative for your organization? And then lastly, the most forgotten one is time frame. At what time frame do you want this? Is this monthly, quarterly, annually? Is this a 5-year plan? What does this look like in terms of time frame? And then the optional one to make it more of a smarty goal is environment. So it's the manager, the culture, pace, etc. There's different elements that you could add if you want even more detail involved in these performance objectives. So the example we have, instead of saying perform a bunch of calls and hit your goal, okay, how many calls do I need to hit? What are my key performance indicators to hit what number, and how long do I have to do it? Well, we're saying, hey, within 180 days, we need for you to have $200,000 in sales. And the best way to do that we found is by performing 20 inbound help calls per day. So it makes it very defined. There's a specific task. It is measurable. There's an achievable action. There's a relevant result, and there's a time frame established. So it can be very simple. And the nice thing about these is you could actually make kind of a subgroup of this and put even more detail in. If you want to just put hit $200,000 in product sales, we can have bullet points underneath and make this as detailed as you want it to be. And that's why this is such a great exercise, both internally and for candidates to be able to review. Just diving in a little bit deeper to solidify the point, but smart points to consider. Everything going down here in smart format. Remember, specific task. Try to make it specific, not something as simple as I want to be successful. We see a lot of job descriptions that say this person needs to be successful within their first year. Great, what does that mean? We want them to hit their budget. That is much more black and white. It's much easier to measure. When we talk about measurable, this really allows you to create, as we talked about before, those key performance indicators that actually matter. If it doesn't matter how many phone calls that they make and it only matters that they hit their budget, then don't put those KPIs or those key performance indicators in there. Leave it to the specific task or the measurable result at hand. The next is achievable action. Is it possible? So again, be realistic with what that looks like and make it the minimum of the result that you're looking for. So again, is this important? And we bring it to the level of, would this person actually go on a performance improvement plan, or would they get let go if they did not achieve this minimum goal? Because if that's how we're measuring everybody, it is equal playing field, and you can make these performance objectives for every single role within your organization. And this is how you can measure per role, per division, per team, the success of every single person, whether it's a hire or whether it's your existing teams. And then lastly, time frame. Instead of saying something like, I want to read more, as an example, we say, I want to read 6 books in the next 12 months. Gives us much more of a tangible plan of what that person is looking for. That time frame is specific and optional. If you do want to put environment, who or what is essential to know about? Who are they going to be reporting into? Who are they going to be interacting with? What does the environment look like that may be unique? Those are all points to consider. Okay. No questions in chat, I'm just checking, but I appreciate everybody following along with all this information. I know we're throwing a whole lot at you in a minimal amount of time, but employee value proposition. I just want to reiterate the importance of the EVP, the employee value proposition. Why would a top person who is not looking want your job? Statistically, about 95% of top performers are not looking for opportunities. They're happy in the positions that they're in. They're successful in the positions that they're in. They're not actively looking. They're often not putting their resumes out there. Why would they? They're the top performers, and organizations are doing everything possible to keep them. At least successful organizations are doing that. And so we need a pitch, and we need something to be able to present to a candidate that includes your company brand or just the uniqueness of the opportunity itself that is going to attract somebody to this opportunity. We want to attract those top performers. And most often we have to entice them in different ways. That's part of this recruiting process that's really unique and really different. And so here's an example. I'm going to blow this up in a bit. I know it's really tiny to be able to read on your screen, but we try to transform job descriptions, classic job descriptions, into more performance profiles. These performance profiles start with kind of that employee value proposition and a high level overview of the role. So you start with kind of giving just a little taste to get somebody enticed into the opportunity. And we follow it up with all the different elements that we are looking for this person to be successful within the role. So starting with just kind of a high level. So we do a little bit of an intro, but if you go to the 3rd paragraph down, here's a little bit of what we would do to try to entice somebody for our talent acquisition consultant, our recruiter role internally for Titus. So we really we present the opportunity for upward mobility. We know that's a fast growing organization. So if people are enticed by career opportunities and upward mobility, that's an element that we want to speak to. We want you to be able to know that you can have an opportunity to help lead a team, that you're going to get onboarded successfully with plenty of handholding. You're going to have a mentorship program. We know that you're going to be able to work remotely. So the flexibility is going to be critical for somebody if they're missing that. I know COVID has made everybody flexible, but usually this is really attractive for a lot of people. And being able to earn as much time off as you want. So we've tried to hit on so many different pain points, potential pain points for people. If they're saying, I feel stagnant in my career, or if I feel like there's no flexibility here, or if I don't have enough time off, something should hopefully resonate and pop to them that we would include in not only our messaging when we reach out to people, but right here in our, what we would call our performance profile, the job description. And then we want to know what we need to achieve as candidates. What do I actually need to achieve? Is this something I've done before? Can I do it again? So just an example of one objective. So a major objective is to deliver results on 4 to 5 recruiting projects per week. It's measured quarterly based on, and you can see the things that we have it based on. But we also then have sub-objectives to help get you there. How do I deliver results on 4 to 5 recruiting projects per week? Well, I know that I need to have at least 3 to 5 new candidates in dialogue every week, and I need to submit one every other week for every search that I'm on. So now we can get much more detailed into the how versus the what. Okay, let me just pause here. I'll give you an opportunity to read through some of these to give you the examples. We are, I believe, Hannah, going to have a digital download of some of the, okay, good. So we'll have a digital download of the notes, the information, the deck, just to make sure that you have this. It's already been sent, of course. So the workbook was sent yesterday. Hannah's always a step ahead of me. So you've got it. This is all part of what you should be able to have and take away from the session today. Good. So after all this, there's a big intake, and we know that there's going to be a whole lot of information that you're going to be talking through with hiring managers and recruitment team and human resources. It's time to calibrate. The critical mistake that we made when we first created our firm was gathering all the information and then not confirming everything. And what we found was we'd be recruiting for several weeks and we'd find great candidates, and we're like, hey, there's this candidate. This one is $80,000. This one is $85,000. And the hiring manager is like, time out. I asked you for $50,000 candidates or $60,000 candidates. And we're like, no, it becomes a kind of a he said, she said. It became a big waste of time. We weren't calibrated in that area. These things are very real. They happen. There's a lot of data that's being downloaded. We want to make sure that we are calibrated. We have it written on paper, that there's a lot of clarity surrounding that. But we also know who is responsible for what. So what is our internal process? Who's taking it? The worst thing that can happen is we drop the ball. A really fascinating statistic was 52% of candidates do not receive a follow-up after their first initial phone screen. 52% of candidates don't even receive a follow-up of saying yes or no. And that, I promise you, will really negatively impact your brand in the industry. And it's most likely unintentional, but it's really critical to make sure we have communication at its peak throughout this process. And then the constant feedback, that consistent feedback has been critical of making sure we connect, hopefully weekly, giving ideas of, okay, how can we pivot? How can we change? Here are the candidates we have in play. Make sure that again, the line of communication remains open is really critical, in continued alignment and continued calibration. The other piece is, if you do use any sort of an assessment tool, we would really urge that you use a tool that is able to create objective benchmarks. Objective benchmarks are really critical to make sure it's not just an opinion, or you're not just looking at, an ideal personality for the hiring manager or the team. Use objective data in making sure that we can create some of those benchmarks by gaining input from the stakeholders on that search. Because what it allows us to do is we're able to then look at that information behaviorally, cognitively, whatever you use or whatever you prefer to use. If you use an assessment tool, make sure that you go through that practice, so we can use this not as a disqualification tool. That is a really critical piece. We don't want to use assessments as any sort of disqualification tool, but rather a way that we can sculpt our interview process and sculpt our onboarding process appropriately when the candidate does come through. The reason we do that is, historically, when it comes to on-the-job performance indicators, a lot of these are ones that we may use. And it's not that it's bad. All of these combined are great, and it's going to increase the likelihood of a good hire. But you see things like reference checks, only 7% predictive of actual on-the-job performance. I don't think I've ever run into a reference check where somebody didn't put people that were going to give them glowing reviews, of course. So reference check is just a small piece of the puzzle. Things like integrity tests are used a lot in healthcare, but interviews alone, even a very structured interview, is only 34% predictive of on-the-job performance. And so when we combine one of those strong interviews with an assessment of some kind, the hit rate naturally is going to go up. And so the more things we can add while still maintaining a good candidate experience, I'm not suggesting a 2-hour assessment, but anything that we can add is certainly something where we would consider it to be a high value. So that's what we call the launch. That's the amount of and level of preparation that we want to be able to provide our teams and anybody here that is joining the call today. This is what we would really strongly recommend. We're going to skip over the hunt for right now. but we are going to dive into the evaluation. A couple of things to note that I think are really critical in understanding how to truly evaluate each candidate is this a job stretch? So we call it the 30% stretch. And I know it's kind of a purposely subjective number to just get people thinking of beyond what they're going to get paid. Will they really consider this above and beyond what they're doing right now? Why would that top performer want to leave what they're doing, where they're successful, unless they're going to get stretched? Why is this a superior opportunity? The other thing is do the performance objectives align? Have they actually done this before? Because the past certainly does predict the present. So we want to ask questions around their most significant accomplishments. That's probably the biggest question we can ask is, professionally speaking, what is the most significant accomplishment that you have ever accomplished within your career to date? And when they answer that question, we essentially can follow up with 20 other questions, such as who was involved in the process? Why was it so important? What was the timeline? What were the resources that you had? What were some of the critical areas where you failed? And what was the ultimate success? How were you rewarded? There's so many things that we can ask around that one question that I think are so critical in finding out per performance objective, can they do it? And can they do it again? And so that can really alleviate any concerns of, do they not have that exact 5 years of experience that you're looking for? Well, when they've done it time and time again for the last 3 years, we can feel a lot more confident in moving forward. And then lastly, are we measuring all components of head, heart, and briefcase? What is critical to note is head, heart, and briefcase isn't always an equal 33% each. We know that there's certain roles, especially when we talk about entry-level hires, you might be weighting that head and the heart component more than the briefcase, which is essentially going to be empty. Or if I'm looking for a surgeon, I probably don't care as much about their bedside manner as much as how successful are they as a surgeon. So we get it. We know that you can't always have 33% of the equation, but do we analyze each piece of this effectively? That is the really critical question that we need to ask in evaluating each candidate. So a way that we can do it, and again, if you do use an assessment, you can use this to see if there's any sort of potential red flags and any misalignments between that benchmark that you create, your expectations, and what that candidate possesses. Because now we can sculpt our interview accordingly. So let's say that we're looking for somebody with extreme amounts of attention to detail. Let's say it's an estimating or a project manager sort of opportunity. That would take a lot of detail. And if somebody comes in where it shows that they love risk equals opportunity, they've got low attention to detail, they're very comfortable with ambiguity. Well, those are good attributes to have, but in this role, that would be a little bit of an alarm that would go off in my mind. I want to ask questions now specific to that detail piece. Have they done it again? Can they adjust? Because people can adjust, but how have they done it in the past, and can they do it again? Are they running from their current opportunity, or are they running to your opportunity? Are types of questions that we want to be able to find the answers to throughout the process. So the way we go about it is through something we call a candidate portfolio, where we try to measure the head, heart, and briefcase. We've covered the head pretty well when we talk about using assessment data within an interview process, but the heart and the briefcase are a little bit more complex. And apologies if it's so small to read, but I think you have some of these documents with you. But when we look at the motivating factors, if we look at core value alignment, that is a really critical piece. And I want to know the way that they answered those questions, why this is important to them. What is their true motivation behind a move? Are they culturally going to be a match for us, or is this a bit of a stretch? That is a big, important piece that we look at. And then lastly, the more historic interview of the briefcase. Let's talk about work history. Let's talk about your previous accomplishments. And then let's talk about the initiatives that we're looking to accomplish. And let's make sure that they align and that you've done it before. Now I feel a whole lot more comfortable when I submit a candidate forward to my internal hiring teams that this is going to be the right person. So this is an idea of what you can do, or what we work with is if you've got somebody on your team that is not as much into the weeds or into the detail. They just want a high level, is this a good candidate or not? We try to use just an overview of that. Okay, what are the main things that we need to know? Are they a match from behavioral and cognitive abilities? Are they a match when it comes to our values? And are they a match in terms of can they do and accomplish those performance objectives that we find to be the most important? And then of course, are they affordable? So the big three for us is, are they qualified? Are they interested? And are they affordable? So those big three are the things that we need to answer in response to every single candidate that we are putting forward to our teams. And then lastly, we've created a quality scorecard for each person that really takes into consideration each of the different areas of head, heart, and brief face when analyzing each candidate. So gathering assessment data, problem solving, yes, some of this is subjective. How do we really know somebody's motivation? How do we really know, their organization and planning based on what they've given to us? This is a bit more of a continued calibration exercise for hiring managers. So each person that completes an interview with a candidate, we would really strongly suggest having some sort of scorecard in place to make sure that we're ranking people the same. Because if I tell you that I think they're a perfect match when it comes to organization and planning, and we share the same culture, but Kyle disagrees completely with it and gives them a 1, we are not aligned and we're not calibrated in what questions we're asking or maybe what we're looking for with those candidates. So really important that we make sure that we are continually in alignment throughout this process. All right, next is the close. So we've covered the launch. We've foregone the hunt a little bit. Again, we can help in that area and provide any sort of advice that you possibly need after the presentation. Next, we did the evaluation, how we actually measure and assess people. And last is the close. So how do we actually close? This is something that we continually try to hone in and perfect as much as we can. But the key to closing is simply communication. So when we submit a candidate to our teams, here are some of the types of questions that we want to be able to ask. Okay, so candidate, we're going to go back to them, make sure that they have a great candidate experience. So look at the stats below. 83% of talent say negative interview can change their mind about a role or company. And the majority of them are saying that they're going to post that on social media. So think what you will about social media. I'm not a huge fan of social media as well, but the reviews are very real. And it is very difficult when we work with partners who have very low ratings on things like Glassdoor or Google or Facebook. When we look at those reviews and we're like, we've got a little bit of reputation management we're going to have to go through. And a big part of it simply comes from the interview process of not having adequate amounts of communication or feeling like they were disqualified without any sort of reason or feedback. So we want to make sure we connect with candidates even before an offer goes out of what did you learn about the opportunity? Who did you speak with? Were there any red flags? What were the next steps given? So we can then communicate with our hiring team. And then when we originally spoke, we're kind of solidifying and continuing to, I guess you could say, sell the opportunity to them of saying, hey, when we spoke, you said X, Y, and Z were important to you. Do you think this role would provide that and why? So getting the candidates' feedback is really increased our fill rate. When it comes to the candidates, we've historically had people that took counter offers, for example. Counter offers, it's a very fascinating stat to me, is 75% of counter offers, people that accept a counter offer, 75% of those people are gone within 12 months. Usually because they've dipped their toes in the water. They've already kind of taken themselves out of the zone of the role that they have, or the manager now doesn't really see them as that loyal team player. You've kind of put yourself in a tough position when it comes to accepting counteroffers. So we want to be very careful when we're reaching out to people who are qualified, people that are interested in an opportunity. We are shaking up their lives quite a bit. This is a major life change when it comes to a career switch, as you would all know. Imagine waking up and wanting a different opportunity or getting reached out by a recruiter that's positioning a new opportunity. This is a big life switch that we don't want to take lightly. So the next thing we do is we take all that information and we reconnect with our team, our hiring teams, of how did it go? Are we in alignment? What did you like? What didn't you like? What was missing? What are going to be the next steps in the process to make sure that we've got that communication line open? And then lastly, how would you compare the candidate to the other candidates that we have in play? Where do they rank? And if we can forward them, how interested are you in moving forward? Knowing that they're looking for $100,000, how interested are you in moving forward? Because that's what it's going to take to win that individual over. These are really critical pieces that we want to make sure we're transparent with our teams, with candidates, as much as possible to make sure that we can close the loop and get you the candidate that you really need and deserve. So we flew. We got through everything mostly in here in about 40 minutes. Would love to open it up for any questions, comments, or feedback that people have, if any. Again, feel free to put it in the chat, unmute if you've got questions specific, but we can take some time. Yeah, so good question. So we had somebody ask, can you share a little bit more on the hunt phase? So I don't have anything prepared visually for you to be able to have, but for the hunt, what we would try to do is what we would call strategic messaging campaigns. So there's a couple of different ways that we would go about the hunt, and it really depends on what you are all ultimately comfortable with. I know some people are not at all comfortable with cold calling people at their place of business or headhunting people. That is something that some people would say, I will not do that. That is something that we usually will do, is we'll have kind of a separate pitch of, hey, we understand that you're at work at this point. We know that you're probably happy where you are. We've got an opportunity based on your background. I think it would be something that would be really worthwhile talking about. Want to be respectful to your employer. Can we talk outside of business hours to connect? And that's something that's historically been extremely receptive. People have been extremely receptive to that for us. But otherwise, I think the majority of people use a little bit more of a strategic messaging when it comes to emailing or LinkedIn messages. LinkedIn in-mails are other ways that we can go through. But we also are going to share some other components of the hunt of how to actually reach out to candidates. We'll give you some scripts that we use that have been historically really successful for us when it comes to persuasive messaging through email, and how you can go about that. Days and times where it's going to be the most successful for you to send those messages are also going to be critical components of it. But also, what kind of networking and groups and relationships do you need to establish, and going through that pipeline is also really critical when it comes to finding the most ideal candidate. So that's a little teaser into some other things that we can send everybody for the hunt. We've got a question too of where do I start? So how do I even start this whole thing? So what we would recommend is, and I know it seems archaic, but LinkedIn. LinkedIn is probably our biggest resource that we use when it comes to harvesting candidate information, using keywords, using what we call Boolean searches, and we can provide more information on that of how to actually create search strings that are going to have keywords of items that are going to be critical for you in looking for the ideal candidate when it comes to looking and creating kind of your call list or your email list when it comes to finding and proactively looking for these top candidates. Because again, they're not really more for the people that are posting. We are really looking for people that are not looking. So looking for people on LinkedIn has been successful for us because we'll have a candidate database of maybe 50 to 100 candidates that meet those selection criteria points that we need to analyze and be able to look at. So let's say we're looking for an inside salesperson. We're probably gonna have hundreds of people that have inside sales as their title. So we might need to dig in a little bit more to keywords that mean more to us. So things like budget and achieving goals, and what are those specific performance metrics that they have labeled, and kind of tiering candidates within your own database. And we have kind of a 4-phase process that we go through of candidates that we're pursuing that on paper look to be ideal candidates for us to reach out to. Within our outreach, we can then shift them over to an in dialogue phase of, yes, they've responded with minimal amounts of interest, or maybe big amount, hopefully huge amounts of interest, that they want to talk about this opportunity. Then once we talk to them and have a full in-depth and we put them into our process internally, we can then put them into a submitted candidate database. That submitted candidate database is now we're getting to the hiring managers, we're getting to the teams that can start making decisions on the candidate. And we also have a fourth category called discard. Discard would be people that are not interested in the opportunity, but it's actually a good opportunity for us to better analyze why people are saying no. Why are people actually declining this opportunity? Is it the role itself? Is it our company reputation? Is it our salary that we're offering? What are those different pieces that are going to be essential for us in pivoting and making sure that we can get the right candidate? Now, realistically, people don't always get the person that they want. We might have to manage our expectations based on what we can afford, but at least we can be realistic and have some data around it. Yeah, good questions. Another one came through. How do you transition to a performance profile and why is it important? So we've helped a lot of organizations and happy to do one or two with you of taking your job description and transforming it into a performance profile. And the reason why it's important is a classic job description. I think people get hesitant on changing it because they think it's not going to meet compliance standards like OFCCP or EEOC. Absolutely it does. And we can certainly work in making sure that it is with you. And the reason why it's so important for us is to make sure that candidates are not only attracted to your opportunity, even more so, but that they truly know what is expected of them. What minimum expectations are there going to be to make sure that they are equipped to be successful within the organization. I want to know that as a candidate that I need to achieve XYZ versus I need to have a minimum of 10 years of experience in a certain field. What do I need to do, achieve, and accomplish versus who am I as an individual and what kind of experience do I have? So transforming those have been really, really impactful for so many different organizations that we work with because they're seeing a whole lot more engagement from candidates. They're seeing the quality when they do post their jobs and their positions. They're seeing the quality of candidates align so much more because somebody that has 5 years of experience in any industry isn't just going to apply for your role. Most likely, you're going to see people that have that specific industry experience apply for the role because they think they can do and achieve those exact things that are measured on paper. So it does a little bit of a filtering process for you up front. Good. I'll give another minute in case people are still looking for questions. I think we got through most of these. Beautiful. Is Linda showing in here? If people aren't receiving the chat, let me read it. Linda's just saying, appreciative of Titus coming through. Linda, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for hosting us. SCHRMA will provide the slide deck and HRCI and SCHRM credits following the webinar as soon as possible. And again, thank you on behalf of SCHRMA as well as Titus. Really appreciate your time and hopefully talking again soon. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.